I'm Davy, and I'm awesome, and welcome to Davy Talks Wrestling, where I talk about wrestling-related things, all from the perspective of a fan, not an insider, and you guys sit back and enjoy. So this week, I'm actually going to review a docu-series that I've recently discovered on Hulu called Dark Side of the Ring. Some of you may be like, I've known about that for a couple of years. Well, I didn't, because apparently this is a Canadian show that we didn't have here in America, except for some bootleg videos. Until within the last few months, they put it on Hulu. And at first, I didn't want to watch it because, as a fan, I do like to focus more on the good stuff in wrestling. I'm not one of the fans who likes to sit there and do nothing but talk about all the controversial stuff that ever happened. However, I do gotta admit, this docu-series is really, really good. Now, I don't have the time to sit here and review every episode, but I will give you a list of every episode so far. So in season 1, it starts with the match made in heaven, talking about the Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth, and how they had this great relationship that played out on camera. Everybody loved it. Every guy loved Miss Elizabeth, and every guy wanted to be the Macho Man. Ooh, yeah! Plus, every wrestling fan can do a Macho Man impression. But then it went into Randy Savage and his very documented jealousy of his wife and their divorce, and then, of course, the sad, tragic passing of Miss Elizabeth, followed by the sad, tragic passing of the Macho Man. The second episode delves into the Montreal Screw Job, something that every wrestling fan has talked about at length. We've been talking about it ever since it happened in '97, and yes, we are all still arguing about it. People are still arguing if they think it was a work, if they thought it was real, arguing whose fault it was, who could have done something about it. I've even had people incessantly tell me that I should do an episode of Davy Talks Wrestling just on the Montreal Screw Job, and I don't know, we've talked about it so much, but this did shed a little bit more light on the Montreal Screw Job. Episode 3, the killing of Bruiser Brody. This was one that really intrigued me because Bruiser Brody was killed way before I was really an active wrestling fan, but hearing about it and then, of course, researching who was Bruiser Brody and finding out that Bruiser Brody was like one of the best characters ever and how tragic he died, but for the longest time we don't get a whole lot of insight into what happened. We finally get some insight into not only what happened, but some of the people who were there, the eyewitnesses and whatnot. And if you were like me and always like, okay, well, what really did happen, this is a great docuseries to check out, by the way. Episode 4 was the last of the Von Eriks, chronicling Kevin and Von Erich becoming the only Von Erich left. It was a good episode. It gave a little bit more insight, but if you've seen Triumph and the Tragedy of World-Class Championship Wrestling, like I reviewed months ago, it wasn't shedding that much different light on it. The mysterious death of gorgeous Geno. This was another thing that has been shrouded in controversy for a long time, and this sheds some light, but I would not say completely erases all the doubts that people have about Geno Hernandez and his unexpected death. And then the final episode of the first season, The Fabulous Moolah, was another one I was really interested in because in the last couple of years, we've had all this controversy about Fabulous Moolah and what she may have done. Them saying that she forcefully pimped out female wrestlers and stuff like that. It was why, because at one WrestleMania they had the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. They were like, why don't we do one for the women and do the Fabulous Moolah Invitational Battle Royal? And before it ended up actually happening, it got canceled and just renamed the Women's WrestleMania Battle Royal because all of a sudden all this stuff is coming out about the horrific stuff that the Fabulous Moolah did. And the documentary, with the girls that were around at the time, even the ones that really, really did not like the Fabulous Moolah, it kind of sheds light on the fact that, was she a nice lady? No. Did she do these things, though? No. Basically, them saying it was gossip by people who just didn't like her. And the funny thing is the people saying this were people who also did not like her. The second series, in my opinion, is when it gets really, really good. Like, the first season's really good, but the second season, man. It kicks off with the first 2 episodes being about Chris Benoit. I don't like to talk too much about Chris Benoit because I was such a huge fan of his, and therefore it really did affect me when his the controversy about him committing suicide and killing his family came out, it really, really affected me. It bothered me for weeks. Actually, that's not even fair, because when I think about it, it still bothers me. And it was good to watch this documentary part to shed some light and get a little bit more insight, but also made me really feel for David Benoit, his living son, who I will say I think is the biggest victim in this tragedy, especially because apparently since what happened, he has been bullied, he has been picked on over the internet by people about what his dad did. And I will say this, I love my viewers, but if you're actually gonna sit there and pick on somebody because their dad killed their little brother and stepmother, you are a piece of crap, and I don't care if you keep watching. Episode 3, The Life and Crimes of New Jack. All I can say about this is, as fans, we all know New Jack is crazy, but watch this episode, because you didn't know how crazy. I also recommend it for those of us who live on the West Coast, or ECW fans, and heard about the mass transit incident, but it's really hard to get the whole story. There you go, watch this episode. Episode 4 focuses on one of the biggest abominations that wrestling ever came up with, the Brawl for All. And yes, has Vince Russo trying to defend himself, that it seemed like a good idea at the time, which I'm not going to be one of these Russo haters coming on here bashing Vince Russo incessantly, but how did you ever think that would be a good idea? Episode 5, Jimmy Snuka and the death of Nancy Argentino. Again, this is another thing that happened before my time. Like when Nancy Argentino died, I was probably a year old at the time, and then apparently the controversy kind of died down later, and then in the last few years, right before Jimmy Snuka died, it suddenly popped its head back up, and I'm like everybody else, going what? And this documentary part was good because it again shed some light, and it kind of leaves it up to you to come up with an opinion of what you think happened. I think he accidentally beat her to death. Episode 6, The Assassination of Dino Bravo. There's so many mysterious things that have happened in the wrestling world that we couldn't get a lot of light shined on for the longest time. Now, granted, this is the internet age, but that's not very reliable. The internet is just everybody's opinion, and an opinion is the lowest form of information, really. So it was nice, again, to see this, something I've wondered about for a long time, because I'd heard about the assassination of Dino Bravo, what happened, and again, they're shedding some light on it, as much as they can. Episode 7, David Schultz and the slap heard around the world. We've all heard about the time that John Stossel asked Dr. D, David Schultz, if wrestling was fake, and David Schultz's response was to slap him in the face and say, "Does that feel fake?" and then slapped him again. I think wrestling fans still cheer that. I think wrestling haters still boo that. Either way, it was controversial. And it was a start into them getting rid of kayfabe. Kayfabe being them pretending that this was all real, staying in character no matter where they were, not letting us in on the inside. And sadly, it did end up costing Dr. D, David Schultz, his wrestling career. He later became a bounty hunter. And I do say sadly because I think he could have been the top heel. Later the top heel working with Hogan was Roddy Piper. Might have been better with David Schultz, might not have been, but it would have given him more people to work with. But ultimately the main thing in this one was that this was the start of the death of kayfabe, and a lot of old-timers don't like it, a lot of new-timers do. People have asked me before, what was my opinion on it? My opinion was that kayfabe had to die eventually, but I don't think this was the way to do it. I think it should have just gradually happened, because at the time, John Stossel talked about he wanted to do the documentary to prove that wrestling was fake once and for all, because a third of wrestling fans did believe that wrestling was real. Okay, but 2/3 knew it was just a show, but liked being able to just escape into it enough to believe for a minute it was real, but ultimately understood it's just a show. So because 1/3 were kind of idiots, you had to go and try and kill it for the rest of us? Thanks. But I'm glad it didn't work, because I love wrestling. So, screw you, John Stossel. Episode 8, probably the most entertaining, funny episode, Cocaine and Cowboys, the Herb Abrams story. I had heard a little bit about this from Mick Foley's book, about him working UWF. If you Google it, it's UWF Herb Abrams versus UWF Bill Watts. This was Herb Abrams one. He was a very rich, very eccentric guy who liked cocaine and hookers and tried to run a wrestling company to compete against Vince McMahon. But to me, what this proves, just because you got the money to go compete against Vince McMahon doesn't mean you have the know-how. Like right now, people keep saying that about Tony Khan, like, oh, he's got the money, that's all he's got is the money. No, he's got the money, he's got the intelligence, he's got the know-how, he's got the business acumen, and he also knows how to surround himself with the right people. Herb Abrams was obviously, in my opinion, just a guy who was like, yeah, if I buy a bunch of wrestlers and production value, I can compete. And he couldn't. Episode 9, The Last Ride of the Road Warriors, where it more documents the tragic death of Road Warrior Hawk. Obviously, it doesn't talk about the death of Road Warrior Animal that happened after the documentary was finished. And it didn't really shed any light on me because I've actually read Road Warrior Animal's book, and I'll probably review it someday. But if you haven't read the book, this will shed some light on it. And then episode 10, the final episode of season 2, the final episode they've done so far, the final days of Owen Hart. Again, this one hit me very hard. What I liked about this documentary, though, was they finally got us to hear from the side of Owen Hart's family, his direct family, Martha, his son Oj, and his daughter Athena. No other documentary before has done that. They've always just kind of done the side of Vince McMahon, Bret Hart, people that were in the wrestling business. This one actually got their side of the story, which makes me understand why they don't want to let WWE put him in the Hall of Fame. They don't want to let WWE put him in the video games, make the toys of him. I get it. I still just really wish that you would let them, because they have established a charity in Owen Hart's name, and it's really cool, and that's good that he'll be remembered for that. But as a wrestling fan, specifically a wrestling fan of Owen Hart's, it really does bug me that there's a generation of wrestling fans right now that when I bring up Owen Hart, ask me, who is that? So, like, think about this. If somebody was born on the day that Owen Hart died, they are now old enough to vote. In a year or so, they'll be able to drink. And some of these are wrestling fans, and they have never heard of Owen Hart, because before they had any memory of anything, he was already gone. And that's really sad to me. But after seeing this documentary, I will say this. If I could personally reach out to Martha, Oj, and Athena, I'd say as a wrestling fan, please don't let his legacy die. But if you do, I get it. I will say, though, some people have said on the internet that this episode of Dark Side of the Ring made them rethink their position on the WWE. I disagree. It doesn't make me think any differently about them. As far as things like the big controversy everybody always says is they should have canceled the show. They should have canceled the show. My opinion on that is yes, they should have canceled the show. However, hindsight is always 20/20. So looking back, should they have canceled the show? Yes. But I can understand why they didn't. And I honestly don't think it was greed. I look back to Bret Hart's book, talked about the first time he talked to Vince McMahon after Owen Hart died, and told him you should have canceled the show. And writing this, you could tell that Bret Hart was upset at Vince McMahon for not saying anything else. But apparently all Vince McMahon could say to him was, we didn't know what to do. Me, as a person who tries to remember that these people are still people, I can understand that. I can understand being in that situation and going, I didn't know what to do. It was the first time something like that ever happened. Nobody knew what to do, and I can understand that they wouldn't know what to do. So my opinion on that is, people, give them a break. So that's all the episodes so far for Dark Side of the Ring. Season 3, I guess, is being worked on now, and honestly, I can't wait. Again, I know some of you are like, but you like the positive stuff of wrestling. I do, but as a fan, I can't deny that sometimes some tragic things happen, and I do, like the rest of you, want to know what happened. What's the insight? Not that I feel entitled to, I just want to know, and it's, if they're willing to tell me, then I like when a documentary series does it like this, because this was the thing. Most of the time, when there is a documentary about tragic things in wrestling, it's like they're blaming wrestling, they're bashing wrestling, it's all wrestling's fault, we need to get rid of wrestling. This documentary series wasn't doing that. It was just basically saying, tragic things happen. There's also a series called Dark Side of the Ring After Dark, which only focuses on the second season, but basically a guy, Chris Gethard, hosts with other wrestlers and people involved in the documentaries, and at the very last episode, The Godfather he said, people think that this happens a lot just in wrestling, but this is just life. Tragedies happen. And if you think about it, in entertainment, yeah, of course these kinds of things happen. People die of drug overdoses, not just in wrestling. How many actors and musicians have died of drug overdoses? How many actors and musicians have been murdered? How many, there's some of them that are still shrouded in controversy. It's not just exclusive to wrestling. So I like when they can sit there and give me some insight on some of the tragic stuff that has happened, some of the bad things that have happened, but without blaming the industry itself. So there you have it. That's my overall review of Dark Side of the Ring. I really enjoyed it, and I think if you're a wrestling fan, you would too. If you're not a wrestling fan, I don't think you'd still be watching this video. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications when I post new videos, and leave a comment. Tell me what you thought of Dark Side of the Ring. Love you guys.